What every listener and every viewer might be saying is, why are they doing this? I can get a peptide right now by just going online. All of those uses of peptides technically are not sanctioned by any health professionals, and they are technically not allowed, meaning they're not authorized by the Food and Drug Administration.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. So today on the show, we are talking about peptides. You see it on your Instagram, you see it on your TikTok. Should you take them? We've got the answers for you today. Plus, the House is breaking for its August recess, but they have a lot on their agenda, including funding the government and passing the SAVE Act. We're talking to Ryan Nobles about that. Up first, though. 4 U.S. service members who were killed by Iranian strikes arrived at Dover Air Force Base today for a dignified transfer. And before they arrived, President Trump upped the ante. He posted on Truth Social that the U.S. would retaliate for any time Iran, quote, shoots at a ship in the Strait of Hormuz with a hit on critical infrastructure. Meanwhile, the administration is facing questions over the skyrocketing financial cost of the war, which they say is about $37.5 billion so far. But some officials say the true cost of the war is a lot higher. So for this, I want to bring in NBC News national security and global affairs reporter, Dan De Luce. Hi, Dan.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. So today, with the dignified transfer of the 4 U.S. service members, we are, of course, reminded of the personal cost of this war. But yesterday, we had the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who was pressed by the Senate Appropriations Committee over the monetary cost, the financial cost of this war, by both Republicans, by the way, and Democrats. What exactly is Secretary Hegseth asking for, and what was the response he got in that room?
He's asking, Yasmin, for more than $33 billion for what he called anticipated costs. But keep in mind that already the Pentagon had requested from Congress earlier this year more than $800 billion for their budget. He did not get the most welcoming reception by Democrats and even some Republicans who were really questioning the course of the war, the strategy. What is the objective? Why is the war still going on? And why is it costing so much? They were one senator, Senator Murray from the state of Washington, said that figure you're giving us of about 33 billion or so, that sounds suspiciously low. That she was saying, we expect this bill to be much higher. So they really felt they were not getting a straight picture from the secretary. That was the message a lot of lawmakers had for him. But what was interesting is he wasn't including in this request the cost of repairing bases or damaged aircraft or replenishing the munitions, the bombs and the weapons that are quite expensive that have been used and burned through during the war. So we've reported, our colleagues, Courtney Kuby and Gordon Lubold have been reporting that, this figure that he requested yesterday of over $30 billion does not include the cost of repairing all these bases that have been damaged by Iranian missile and drone attacks, for example.
So he's not basically saying the money is for what's happening really now or rebuilding from what has happened over the last few months, but instead kind of future casting in a way, which brings me to my next point, because I mentioned the president's True Social post as I came to you, where he threatened to, quote unquote, bomb and destroy one bridge or power plant anytime Iran shoots at a ship in the Strait of Hormuz. The president has signaled this war is not ending. What do those attacks mean for this overall budget?
Well, the longer the war goes on and the more there are bombing attacks on Iran and air raids, when we're using, the U.S. is using missiles, bombs, fighter aircraft, refueling those aircraft, using interceptors to shoot down the missiles that are coming at our Arab allies and Israel from Iran, the cost goes up. There's no free lunch. And those are very expensive weapons that we're using. All the weapons have to be replaced. The equipment has to be maintained. We are operating at a pretty high tempo. So, yes, the bill will go up. And then, of course, there's the bigger strategic question, which is where is this all going? And what is the president's idea about and plan about how to end the war? How will the U.S. emerge victorious, or how will it achieve its objectives? It's not clear if the U.S. is bombing a bridge or some kind of infrastructure in Iran for every time the Iranians fire a drone or attack a tanker in the Strait with a drone. How is that going to end the war? He's kind of in a developing quagmire, really. I think most experts are saying this is increasingly looking like a quagmire where there's not a clear exit without some pretty painful choices and compromises.
Well, that's why, I mean, it feels to me, and I wonder if you feel the same way, if these are sort of empty threats from the president, because he has threatened, going after infrastructure like this before.
I think that is the real danger here. That's what a lot of former military officers and former diplomats will say. You hear this from foreign officials and foreign diplomats from both the Middle East and Europe, that he makes a lot of threats. And he also says conciliatory things, and he goes back and forth. And so you're right. I think the danger is here that the social media posts and the threats, if they're not backed up by action, pretty soon have less of an effect on the Iranian regime's calculations. And then, of course, the U.S. allies in the region then have to start asking themselves, how much can we rely on the U.S.? We're not even clear what they're going to do day to day or week to week. It's so unpredictable.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought up U.S. allies, because I want to talk about Saudi Arabia and this nuclear deal that has now been made between the United States and Saudi. What do we know about this agreement, and why now?
This is something that's been discussed for years, dating all the way back to the Obama administration. This idea of a civilian nuclear cooperation agreement with the Saudis. And the idea is that you help another country develop their civilian nuclear energy program.
Right.
And because the U.S. is involved, this will prevent that country from going in the wrong direction and building their own nuclear weapons. That's the concept of these agreements. And we've had them with some other countries. But the one with the Saudi Arabia always was open to debate, right? It caused a lot of consternation. There were people who said, we shouldn't do this. Israel tended to be opposed to it. They were worried it would open the door to the Saudis getting the bomb. There are members of Congress who've said, okay, if we do this, then it has to be under very limited circumstances. As far as we know at this point, and we're still waiting to get more details, it's basically saying that Saudi Arabia will get U.S. assistance from U.S. industry, companies like Westinghouse, to build up their own nuclear power, their own nuclear energy. And they say they need to diversify. They don't want to rely on oil forever. It's a finite resource, and so on and so forth. And then also there is an idea that maybe the U.S. would help build a uranium enrichment facility. That's a pretty controversial idea. They would do a study to look at that. So that's kind of the agreement. But at this moment, it looks like there won't be the maximum kind of restrictions on Saudi Arabia that we've asked other countries to accept, like the United Arab Emirates and Taiwan. So, for example, they will not be banned from enriching uranium. And so, yes, U.S. Industry will benefit from this agreement if it goes through. But it's not. But there are critics who say, are we opening the door for Saudi Arabia to get a nuclear capability, and are we destabilizing the region? And then will other countries like Turkey or whoever decide, okay, we need the bomb too? So, but there's another argument here where the White House will say, hold on, if we don't do anything, then the Russians and the Chinese are going to help them, and that's even worse. And that was sort of the argument that previous administrations made. So it's been a long-running debate, but the timing is, I would say, unclear. Why now?
Dan De Luce, thank you.
Thank you.
So there's always a lot of stress to wrap up some stuff at work before you head out on vacation, and that is where Congress is finding itself right now. Tomorrow is the House's last day before the August recess, and GOP leaders are racing to pass some key agenda items. On Tuesday, the House voted mostly along party lines to fund the government through December 4th. That stopgap funding bill now heads to the Senate, where it's going to require support from Democrats as well. But disagreements over the war in Iran and President Trump's election security priorities are making it a lot harder for Republicans to get that buy-in ahead of the recess. So how much will Congress be able to get done this week? And will it help or hurt members as they go home to campaign ahead of the midterms? For this, I want to bring in NBC News Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Yasmin.
So there is a lot on this to-do list for Congress. We're going to circle back to that stopgap funding bill in a moment. But I want to start first with the war with Iran. Congressional Republicans are actually working on a supplemental package that includes funding for the war with Iran. Where do things stand right now with that package?
As of today, when we're talking, 2 weeks before the Senate leaves for a month-long vacation, 24 hours before the House leaves for a month-long vacation, I do not see a path toward a bipartisan agreement to get a massive supplemental package passed that would not only provide funding to continue the war effort in Iran, but then would also backfill a lot of the munitions and other supplies that have been spent as a result of this war and deal with some other military priorities. This is usually something that gets pretty bipartisan support, but I think it's a demonstration of just how unpopular the Iran war is right now. It shows the divide between Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill. And it also shows a genuine lack of transparency from the administration about where the war stands and how much longer it could go and what the goals and objectives are, which are part of the reason that this really doesn't have a path to passage right now.
So amidst all this, the GOP is also working on this reconciliation package, right? What are they trying to fund through reconciliation?
Well, there's a long list of things. It's basically a lot of Republican pet projects that Democrats wouldn't normally support. There is military funding that's also as part of this reconciliation package. But also what House Republican leaders are trying to do is stuff in aspects of the president's Save America Act into this reconciliation package. It's not an easy thing to do. You can't basically force states to require a proof of citizenship to vote, for instance, which is one of the pegs of the Save America Act, just through the reconciliation process, because you can only use reconciliation if it's tied to a budget resolution. And that means there has to be some sort of spending connected to it, or at least the plan to spend something. The reason reconciliation is a path is because it can be done with only 51 votes in the Senate, where most things require 60 votes. And so that's why Republicans are trying to push through some of this stuff in what would be a third reconciliation package. But right now, there just doesn't seem to be enough momentum to come together on an agreement that would even get the 51 votes that they need.
So you mentioned the SAVE Act, and I want to talk about that as well, because the president made this big primetime address about election security last week, and we haven't really heard about it since. Did that address at all move the needle in the House and or the Senate?
Not even a little bit. You know, most Republicans are already supportive of the Save America Act. They already have voted yes for it. The issue isn't Republicans. It needs 60 votes in the Senate, which means you need Democratic buy-in, and there is zero Democratic buy-in to that. And there was nothing about the president's address that was designed to win over erstwhile Democrats. A big part of it was this possibility that foreign governments could intervene and influence or change votes. There's nothing in the Save America Act that provides more protections for that. In fact, a lot of that has been stripped away. They've cut some of the programs that help that. So there's a lot of misunderstanding as to why the president gave this big speech, made these big declarations about election security, and then pushed a bill that really has nothing to do with some of the things that he was talking about in that speech.
So what's the read on the New Jersey news on Capitol Hill right now? Because Governor Mikey Sherrill came out with this news on Tuesday, saying around 6,600, to be exact, non-citizens mistakenly registered to vote from 2023 to 2024, although only around 400, according to Governor Mikey Sherrill, actually cast votes. How is this being read? How is this being talked about, received on the Hill right now amidst this conversation that we are having about passage of the SAVE Act?
Well, Republicans are saying, see, we told you so. This is happening. There are non-citizens voting in American elections, and we need to fix that, and we need to fix this problem. But what Democrats are arguing is that this is how the process works. We discovered a problem in the system. They attribute it to a DMV software error that we found and we rectified immediately, and none of it impacted the outcome of an election. And then the other thing I think is really important about this argument, which I think gets lost a lot, President Trump makes this argument all the time that illegal immigrants are voting in these elections, that people that aren't even supposed to be in this country are flooding the border and then going right to their polling location. what was very clear about this New Jersey situation is that these were not people that were in this country illegally. They were non-citizens. So, for instance, if you have a green card or you're here on a student visa, you can get a driver's license or an identification card.
Yeah.
You can't vote. And that's where there was a loophole in the system that they discovered, rectified, and fixed to prevent it from happening in the future.
All right. I want to talk about the stopgap funding legislation that the House just passed. It still needs to go through the Senate, right? Why is it the House decided to pass this so early ahead of the September 30th deadline? And is there any chance this thing gets through the Senate?
As of today, the answer to your second question is no. The Senate doesn't want to do it this way. I think the reason that they're doing it so early, well, I know the reason they're doing it so early is because they're setting down a marker. This is like what we'd like to do. This is how we'd like to do it. They want to clear the deck of any sort of threat of a government shutdown well advance of the election. I mean, the dream scenario for both Republicans and Democrats would be able to leave before the August recess with not having to worry about the specter of a government shutdown after Labor Day when people really start paying attention to the general election. Unfortunately, nothing's easy in Congress. And so while the House would like to just clear the deck of this, the Senate believes that it's not a perfect solution to where things are right now. And so this idea that we just don't have to worry about a government shutdown, even though they passed this, I think it's still very much a live ball and still something that's on the table.
Ryan Nobles, enjoy your recess as well.
I'm looking forward to it, yes. Don't text me next week. Don't call me. Don't be like, just one quick thing for the newsletter. I'll be on the beach. Just don't think about me.
I promise. Wink, wink.
All right. Have a good one. Thank you.
Everyone's talking about peptides this, peptides that, this peptides, peptides.
So as you just heard right there, TikTok is literally buzzing about peptides. Tons of posts, sharing routines, giving tips, and also making a lot of claims, not entirely backed up by science.
Take these 3 peptides before bed and your brain repairs itself while you sleep.
What is GHKCU? What are the benefits? And do you have to pin it or can you use it topically? I'm going to be answering all those questions for you guys.
So this week, an FDA advisory panel is considering whether to loosen restrictions on 7 popular peptides. But is there any evidence that they're actually helpful? So for this, I want to bring in Dr. Kavita Patel. She is our NBC News medical contributor. Hi, Kavita.
Hi, good to be with you.
Great to have you. Peptides are everywhere on all of my social feeds. So what are they?
Here's the good news. Everybody needs peptides because peptides are things that your body makes. Peptides are basically short chains of amino acids. Remember those chemistry classes, which are basically the building blocks of any protein. And a very common example of a peptide that all of us are familiar with that our body normally makes is insulin. It's one type of peptide. We make a bunch of other kinds of peptides. Where things get confusing are these other peptides that the FDA is reviewing that are not naturally made by our body, that people are doing all sorts of things, injecting, using in sub-Q ways, putting it into their joints. There's different applications. That's the topic for the specific peptides that the FDA will review.
The FDA specifically is considering a couple of peptides. BPC-157, which is big in the wellness community. DSIP, which is used for sleep, I guess, and then some others as well. I know there's not a lot of science to back up some of the claims made about peptides out there. What evidence is this advisory panel going to be looking at?
Yeah, so the FDA is looking at 7 peptides in total, and they're looking at very specific medical use cases, everything from wound healing and inflammation. You mentioned a popular one, BPC-157. They're looking specifically of the use for ulcerative colitis of BPC-157. They're also looking at things like insomnia, obesity, osteoporosis. So the FDA, again, their job, just to remind everyone, is to determine what is safe and effective for use by Americans. What every listener and every viewer might be saying is, why are they doing this? I can get a peptide right now by just going online. All of those uses of peptides technically are not sanctioned by any health professionals, and they are technically not allowed, meaning they're not authorized by the Food and Drug Administration. So everything that you're seeing in BPC 157, some of these other substances are being done without any guidance from the FDA.
If the FDA does in fact say they're good to go, could you feasibly get insurance to cover peptides?
That's exactly like one of the core questions, is that if the FDA determines for them to be safe and effective. I have a newsflash, though. I read through the hundreds of pages on what the scientists said during their internal review. There was a unanimous across the board to do not recommend to move forward with these use cases. So across the board, the science was not sufficient to say that any of these peptides were safe and effective. And in fact, 3 of them had some very troubling flags for potentially being linked to cancer, potentially being linked to worse outcomes. So there's going to be some very interesting conversations, Yasmin. But yes, in theory, the FDA could move to approve, or at least give like advice to approve. The commissioner would ultimately then have to sign off on it. And then you could see a chain of events where insurance would cover it, and you would actually start seeing prescriptions for this.
Is there a concern about conflict of interest here? Because there's an understanding that several of the members of the panel have deep ties to the peptide industry, and HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is also a huge fan of them.
Yeah, I think that that's become a theme, not just with this particular advisory committee or topic, but I think that's been a theme that's been raised in several of the FDA, CDC, some of the other healthcare agencies. Like, how can you have, the fox guarding the hen house, if you will? It's why I think the very core, as boring and as long as these documents are for people like me in public health, they're very important for anybody to read. I think it's important for people to actually look at the science themselves and say, all right, I'm willing to take this risk because I understand better what I'm trying to target.
Dr. Kavita Patel, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, that is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Basugin. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard and you saw, press the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.